Christine, can everybody hear me okay? I just muted me, so I will not be able to see your questions. Christine, I do have your text up in case someone has questions. Justin, how are you, sir? And welcome everybody to my presentation on mergers and acquisitions. It sounds like it's been an interesting conference so far. I'm still super excited to be a part of it. I know that it's a new thing for all of us, so bear with me. I'm a little bit of a mumbler as it is, so it's only going to be harder, but hopefully you don't miss the good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up my presentation. Okay, everyone. So, thanks for taking the time again. My presentation, I titled it Blood in the Waters. Why? For a couple reasons. One, it's a little bit attention grabbing. And two, what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is mergers and acquisitions, and specifically lessons from outside of your industry. And blood in the water on a macro level, if you're a part of one, it can seem very frantic. It's happening fast. And if the industry is going through this, it sort of feels like a feeding frenzy. So that's why the presentation is titled Blood in the Waters, and it's mergers and acquisitions lessons from outside your industry. I saw the polling. Thank you for everyone for participating. So it looks like we have a good mix of leadership, we have a good mix of backgrounds here. And I always like to ask, where's everyone coming from? That helps me, and it'll change what you take from the presentation. So appreciate everyone, and thanks, Christine, for posting the polling questions. Let's see. So first, who am I? No, I am not a donkey. This slide's up here for me to tell you guys that I do not have a horse in this race. So I'm aware, there can be good and bad connotations with mergers and acquisitions. I'll use some terminology today. It can be cutthroat, but I have no horse in this race. And I'm not saying that merging or selling or being a buyer is good or bad, or that it's good or bad for the industry. What I am going to share with you guys today is some education on mergers and acquisitions, and then some stories from outside your industry, from my industry, and what it did. So again, I have no horse in the race, and I'm not making comments on any of this being good or bad. So who am I to talk to you guys about mergers and acquisitions? Well, I am INSocial Risk Advisors. I'm one of the partners of this insurance agency, and we're actually Opera's preferred vendor partner for business insurance. So why is an insurance guy talking about mergers and acquisitions? I actually have a finance background. So I have a finance background, and I worked at Morgan Stanley after college. I didn't want anything to do with an insurance. So I was in investments in institutional consulting. After a while, I joined my family's insurance agency, and there I was a part of 10 acquisitions, and we sold two agencies off. So I have a decent amount of experience of both being at the table when you're bidding to buy someone else, failing to get a bid. In fact, my partner and I, Jim at INSocial, we bid on an acquisition this year and did not get it. And then also a large chunk of my role when I was at the family agency was to onboard those acquisitions. So after we did a deal, how do you implement the team? How do you implement the systems and the IT? So that was a large chunk of what I did. So let's see. So that's who I am, and why am I talking to you guys about mergers and acquisitions? Why now? So why now are we having this conversation? What made me decide to propose this as a topic? So a couple reasons. One, I see parallels to my industry in that there's the leadership. There's starting to be some leadership transition. And two, the population in general is aging. So as that happens, organizations start to turn over, and that creates opportunity for mergers, acquisitions, internal perpetuations, transitioning of leadership. So that's a big driving factor. And the second factor is I throw a picture of a shark up there because there was what I call a shark. And again, not a positive or negative statement, but there was an individual at the fall conference last year. And actually, I see Justin Bloomhorst is on this session. It was Justin and I talking with this individual. The individual didn't know who I was or what I did. But I very quickly learned that this person came from outside of the state, and their role was to hobnob with you guys, was to interact with you, was to try to discover and find acquisition opportunities. So their whole job was to go and try to get people to sell to her company. So the combination of those two things are what really drove me to think that, hey, this could be starting to happen in the DD field, and my job is to help providers. And so very often it has nothing to do with insurance. So I thought maybe I can bring some expertise, some experience to you guys, and give you a presentation that I know a lot of my peers and my father's peers wish they would have had 10 years ago. So we're in the introduction. What are we going to talk about today? I'm done with the intro, basically. First thing we're going to do, and the most boring part, I apologize, we're going to go through jargon. So I'll being that we have a mix of backgrounds, I'll try to get everyone up to speed on some very high-level basic jargon terms. Then we will look at a deal, like who's involved in a deal and why. Why would someone buy, sell? What are the reasons? Next, we'll talk about what to expect, what to prepare for, and what to expect as a buyer and seller. After that, we will talk about perpetuation. My family agency's goal was to perpetuate. We had no intention of selling. And we'll talk about planning and what it looks like, the difference between internally perpetuating, especially that's more common in not-for-profits, to just change leadership over. So we'll talk about that process in case you never want to buy or sell, which is completely okay. And last, I'll tell you guys the story of how mergers and acquisitions have affected the insurance industry, specifically the insurance agency industry. So what's the purpose? What am I hoping to give you guys today? First, it's just to learn about maybe something you haven't had exposure to before. I hope that it makes you feel more prepared. It gives you guys some background, some tools to feel more prepared to buy or to sell. And then if it happens, or if it's happening to you right now, I'm hoping that this can increase the success of that merger acquisition. And then finally, and this is kind of a long-term thing, I'm hoping all of you guys are able to see the big picture effect it can have on the industry. So really to keep it in mind. The idea is to keep this in mind, because what can happen is I know agencies, and in you guys' instance, it'd be providers who this has been going on behind the scenes for years. It's affected them, and they were really never aware of it. You don't have to participate in the blood in the water, in the frenzy, but it's good to know that it's there. So I saw the second poll. Christine, thank you again. It looks like some people have been part of mergers and acquisitions, and some maybe have been employees of one that's gone through a transition. So that's good to know. I do want to state, before I start to go through the jargon altogether, I am going to remove myself from whether it's a not-for-profit or for-profit. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant, and I know that there are different legal and tax ramifications on how you would do that. So we're just going to kind of talk very high level today, and it's going to be agnostic to whether you're a for-profit provider or a not-for-profit provider. So bear with me. I'll try to go through this quick. It will be the most boring part, and I cannot see the questions. So again, Christine, just shoot me a text if someone has questions, and I can exit out of my full screen here. So let's talk about the terms. First, we have merger, acquisition, consolidation. Do they mean the same thing? No, the answer is no, they don't. So a merger is actually combining of two companies. An acquisition is really one coming in under the other. And a consolidation, they actually rebrand, rename. Two companies come together. It has a lot to do with the tax and legal ramification, but really consolidation is a whole new entity. You know, there's a saying, I've heard this saying a few times tossed around as we've gone through this. In my industry, there's no such thing as a merger or consolidation, meaning someone always ends up on top, someone's always the upper hand. So that's kind of an important saying to keep in mind. If you know you're not the one on top, that means you're getting acquired. Because at the end of the day, you know, there's not typically two executive directors after the deal. There's not two CEOs. So at some point, it's really just an acquisition. But it's good to denote that there is a difference. A merger oftentimes brings on, if it's a not-for-profit, it would bring on another. I'm sorry, if it's a for-profit, it would bring on another owner. That's the most likely thing to happen in a merger. But really, for the most part, they're all acquisitions. You might hear the term asset sale versus an equity sale. So an asset, the assets, whether that's the revenue stream or is it the physical assets, and just really having everything. So due diligence, that's the term used for the process of researching a potential seller. So that's the research and the investigating, digging through the financials. You can look at the age of staff. There's a huge amount of work done, and the better it's done up front, the better it is on due diligence. Synergy, that's just the buzzword for the two things make sense to do this. Are there maybe gut feelings or softer, maybe non-financial reasons to bring two organizations together? So you'll hear that quite a bit. Legal, there's a few legal terms that are worth knowing. And forgive me if I'm preaching to the choir here. Again, I wanted to at least get through this. So letter of intent, that's the official offer letter that says, hey, here's what we would pay for you, and here's the terms. The purchase agreement, that's the actual document that lays out the timeline, everything, the purchase price. That's what both the buyer and the seller sign that says, I agree to the terms. Non-disclosure, that's actually the first thing. And I see organizations not do these a lot. They don't hold their weight a ton, but I strongly urge you to make sure you're signing non-disclosure agreements up front. What those do is they basically say, hey, we're going to learn a lot about one another. There's a very small chance that anything actually happens, but we both agree not to talk about each other. We both agree that we're not going to share some of these secrets we're going to learn. And a non-compete, I talked to a provider at the Franklin County Provider Fair who actually enforced the non-compete, and it worked. I was a little surprised. But basically, non-compete says, specifically, they're used for the seller. After a deal would close, you're not allowed to go start an agency somewhere else. You can't take clients. You can't take, information or staff. That's what a non-compete does. So implementation. That is basically what happens after the deal closes. So the better the implementation plan, the happier everyone's going to be. And we'll talk through that. Private equity. And this is important to know because this is, I know that there are some providers that have private equity backing. And this is what really shook up the insurance industry, and I'll get to that. But it's essentially a group, or it could be, an individual's. One of the largest insurance brokerages in the country is actually partly owned by the Canadian State Teachers Retirement Fund. So that's private equity that came in and was investing in insurance agencies. So it's basically non-public, strong financial backing. A lot of times it's very focused, very niche industry expertise, and they typically have deep pockets. So it's a group of people that come in to take an ownership stake. So those are the basic terms. Real quick on financial terms. So financial basics, we have the revenue, the top line, expenses, the bottom line. I'm sure everyone knows what those are. Fixed expenses, variable expenses, and then specifically in mergers and acquisitions, you look at continuation expenses. So the next thing I have here is pro forma, because what you do is you try to take provider A, the seller, provider B, the buyer, and then you project out what combining those companies would look like financially. And the continuation expenses here is a little less frequently used verb that basically means, hey, the buyer is probably going to whack a lot of these expenses. Whether they tell the seller what they're going to whack and why is a whole other conversation. But what the buyer is trying to do is lay the two finances on top of each other, and look out. We're bidding on one right now, and I'm looking at what our finances with theirs would look like for 2021. Because that's what's going to ultimately affect how much they would offer or what the financial trigger is. So pro forma is that projection, a made up what if of financials. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And I'll get to why that matters. The valuation, that's the total amount the organization's worth. I see a typo in there, forgive me. And also the process by which you decide the value. So sometimes that's actually a verb. I'm doing a valuation. I have a consultant doing a valuation. But it's also what it's worth. What's the valuation? The multiple. So oftentimes organizations, and every industry has their own standard, but they're either they're a multiple of something. So it could be a multiple of the top line, a multiple of the bottom line, or something in between. So, for example, it's old school in insurance that looks like I have. Oh, good feedback from James on the non-compete or the NDAs. Thank you. And good addition on the non-solicit. Absolutely. Again, I am not an attorney, and this is high level. So, good catch. Thanks, James. When we talk about the multiple, you guys can just we both generate $1 million of revenue. Maybe one's group homes. What's the at a 2 times revenue multiple? They're both worth $2 million. But what's missing? Are they the same? Are they both really worth $2 million? So I'll pause a minute and let you guys kind of think about what's missing in this valuation sample. Absolutely. Someone said the EBITDA liabilities. So the liabilities and the debt partly matter. A great point. Liabilities and debt partly matter whether it's an asset or the equity sale. So typically the selling provider in this example, the liabilities would be backed out of what they take, the net gain they get. So liabilities they can be a factor. The assets, what are the value of the assets? What's their expenses? So again, EBITDA, huge deal. So, oh, and sorry, forgive me, I'm missing a slide here, guys. But so yeah, expenses, the revenue growth, the retention of revenue, and then the non-financial characteristics. What if you're a vocational provider that really wants to break into day program? Well, you might be willing to take that same revenue you might pay 2.2 for provider B because they're vocational, but you wouldn't pay it for provider A because it's a different operation. So absolutely the expenses matter, the revenue growth and retention matters, and then it's all that other stuff, that non-financial characteristics. Where is it located? Where is it located in relation to your firm? All of those things kind of matter. So it's really, especially as a seller, if you were to be a seller, you want to be aware of the fact that if the smart buyers, the sharks swimming around, the smart buyers will come in, they'll charm you, they're all excited about the organization, and what they do is they'll come in and they're really good at putting offers together. But they are also really good about projecting what they're going to change in the finances after the fact. And so it's really important to be aware of, as a seller, what characteristics of yours makes you interesting to that prospective buyer. Because 2 times the revenue is not the same as 2 times the expenses. So what if provider A was spending $2.1 million a year and provider B was spending 1.5? Now are they both worth 2 million? Probably not. But what if I added to you guys that provider A has been growing at 20% a year? Now their 2.1 spending doesn't look so bad because they're investing for growth. So again, you really have to know these terms, and then you kind of have to lay it out simply. I really like to take them and put them in a simple table like this and just kind of high level think about, what are all the variables? Okay. So I will pause for a second. Exactly. Culture. I see people responding culture, overall goodwill, all beautiful. How would the culture fit? The brand. How does the branding fit? Awesome answers, guys. I will pause for a minute. Any questions on terms? Did I miss any terms? Any terms you guys have heard that you want to talk about? No? Awesome. Let's see. So the deal, who and why? What are the parties to an acquisition? So you have the buyer and the seller, obviously. The seller can have these representatives, but so can the buyer. The buyer would typically have an advisor, and obviously everyone has lawyers and accountants. The seller, honestly, if you're a family-owned provider or a for-profit, owned provider, having that exit strategy, talking to those advisors 5 years before selling really makes the most sense. So, and the broker is much like a real estate agent. There are brokers that will help sell you. It's a huge industry in my field, in insurance. As a buyer, you don't always want the seller to have a broker. As a seller, a broker's, they're going to get you max value, or maybe not always max value. They're going to really spell out, hey, this organization would pay a little bit more, but based off what you told me is important to you, maybe you take 90% to go with this other organization because of those soft soft costs, soft benefits. So again, a broker, if you're a seller, is probably, it'd be like selling your house. It'd be like selling your house without a real estate agent and not going to all the prospective buyers out there. So definitely, if you're a buyer, be aware that it changes the game if the seller has a broker. So there's nothing better than just two organizations that know each other, that would fit well, and they court each other over years, and it works for everyone. That is smooth. It's not bad to have a broker representing you, but it's just good to be aware, whether you're the buyer or the seller, of what parties are involved. So let's talk about the seller. And I put transitioner in here in quotes because I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the fact that selling isn't a necessity, right? Perpetuation is an option. I have a client that's going through leadership transition, a provider of group homes going through leadership transition right now. The more you plan as a seller and the farther ahead you plan as a seller, the more you get to pick your path, right? The more you choose what happens to you as whether it's owners or if it's leadership, if not for profit, or if it's the executives or the team. Just the more planning done, the sooner, the more you have control over your path. So let's talk about why you would sell, why you would merge. It's a teeter-totter of two things. And all of them can be in play at once. It's a must sell or a want to sell, right? So a few reasons why people have to sell. I have two peers that have literally died at the desk this year. Not COVID related, just complete fluke. And they're left with nobody to run the agency. So death and disability is a huge factor when a sale is forced, and that's never good for the remaining staff. It's tough, right? So that can force a sale. Leadership disputes, some contracts, some bylaws, some operating agreements actually say, hey, we go to sale if we can't arbitrate and can't agree on something. So if you have if it's a LLC owned by 3 members and they don't have enough votes to build this building, it can literally be triggered to a sale. Or we've seen fights, we've seen agency owners fighting about something to where they just throw their hands up and sell. Or financial, if you're in financial trouble. None of those you want to have happen. Obviously, you don't want to be forced to sell the organization. That's typically not a good thing. Something's going wrong. And that's where the planning comes in. There's also times where it's not part of an exit strategy, but maybe you want to sell or merge for strategic reasons. Again, to get into a new market, to partner with an organization that you have a good working relationship with that has more resources than you do. Maybe they're really good at something you're not. And then I'll talk further on this topic later in the presentation on wanting to sell as that being part of an exit strategy. So maybe retirement of leadership, transition of leadership, boredom. Selling is definitely an option to make that part of your plan. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's why you would sell. Why you buy? Honestly, it's to get more juice out of the fruit, right? The real main reason that buyers would be driving the buyers is really because they think it's good value, whether it's cash flow, whether it's strategic for their organization, whether it's acquiring talent, or if it's actually financial money today. That's why buyers would buy. The main premise is to get more out of the organization. But specifically, let's talk about why buy. There's specific targets that make sense. If you're a buyer and you're looking for a provider to partner with, I'll start on the left. I'll start at 9 o'clock. So a horizontal integration is going to really be someone at your level. It could be a similar operation, and you want to become more efficient together, right? I'll go down and I'll tell you why I'll stop at strategic. So let's go to vertical integration. Vertical integration is up and down the supply chain. Your group home that purchases non-medical transportation company. I actually have an NMT client who just started another LLC to buy the van leasing company. So that's a true vertical integration. They're going up and they're going to be leasing vehicles from themselves. Now under this new LLC, they'll also be leasing vehicles to other businesses that need it, but they basically bought an entity up the supply chain. Market extension. So this one's kind of unique because it can get you to a new location. So that quote unquote shark that I said was swimming around at the conference last fall, that they maybe were trying to get into the Midwest. So you could be a new location or a new market. So again, any questions on the parties? So we just kind of talked about who's involved in the deal and why they would be involved. Any questions on that? And forgive me, it's definitely not as interactive. I purposely didn't do any cutout video or anything, and so I know the presentation is a lot of talking. I'm assuming that's what's been par for the course. So I didn't do any video or any cutouts or anything like that. So if it's just me rambling, I apologize. Looks like no questions on the last section. So let's talk about what to expect if you're a buyer or a seller. What do we have to expect? So first, if you're the seller, right? So let's say whether it was planned or unplanned, if you're going to be selling or merging with another organization, you got the price. That kind of speaks for itself. How much do you care about the name, the brand? What is there staff that you want to protect? Do you want to protect the whole team? Do you not care? I've seen all of the above. Is the physical location, do you own it? Is it very strategic? Is it, do you not care if they shut down that location the next day? These are all things that the decision makers need to think about. So then these next three, what job titles, specifically job titles and tasks, the owners, whether it's a for-profit, not-for-profit, or the leadership if it's not-for-profit, what do they do post-sale? So first, titles and tasks. These last three go together. Second, how do they do those titles? Or I'm sorry, how do they do those tasks? So, if my job is to stamp it, but now they want me to stamp it left-handed, you would be surprised post-acquisition how frequently you get grumpy parties. Because, it's not a party. You get grumpy people because, I was doing this way forever. And now they want me to change the color of the blinds. So we have a question that looks like, how do you go about strategically finding a company to buy apart from those that are for sale online? Great question, Anita. There's a few ways. So, and I've done both personally. You have two main ways. You can do the equivalent of cold call, which is basically send letters, create a really good, succinct talk track on who you are, what you're looking for, and why. And you just drip on people. And then it's trying to get meetings. It's taking people to lunch. it's having coffee, and it's not a fast process. So, and I would say, and I don't have a slide on this, but if you're doing that, if you guys are strategically looking, if you're a buyer and you're trying to go recruit sellers, you need to plan on talking to 50 to get 10 that are interested, to get 5 where you would make an actual offer, to actually close 1. So I should have a number slide on that, but it's a numbers game. So you have 2 main, you can cold call and send letters, or you can network, things like the conference, just network, do your research, Google and use Opera and use peers and get a database of potential sellers and hit them up. You hit them as frequently and systematically as you can. There's no other easy, quick way to get people that weren't sellers to become sellers. And just plan on that being a 2-3 year process with any one potential seller. And definitely hit local in the markets that you want. Talk to accountants, talk to lawyers. And I see James looks like, he said CPAs, brokers, banks can be a resource. Absolutely. So you don't have to go straight to the horse's mouth, so to speak. You can find other people that may, not be in the industry, that might know who's thinking about selling, who's thinking about retiring. Put pause on it. So I think 2 things have put pause. So again, I'm not an expert in care when there's something that big up in the air. So the equivalent to my industry was the Obamacare, the Healthcare Act, that put kind of a freeze when that was coming out. That put a freeze on buying benefits agencies. So buying insurance agencies that did health insurance, right? So when there's legislation like that up in the air, people just kind of freeze. I don't know that it necessarily would decrease demand, but that would be a good question for others, and I can try to do some digging. So I'm not specifically sure on how managed care has increased or decreased demand for acquisitions. So the key here on this slide, guys, great questions. Thanks for making it interactive. That's always better. The key here on this slide, guys, is to, if you're a potential seller, know which of these is important and rank them. Most deals break down because of the last 3 bullets. So that's why I kind of clump them together. You can have the right price. You can say everything right on the, what you want the seller to do with their brand, what you want to do with it. Most deals break down because at the end of the day, you're getting people that had control to give it up. And if that's not well defined, or at least it's out of sight, out of mind, there's 2 schools of thought there. Most deals break down because of those last 3. So the price, profitability, growth. We kind of talked about this. I won't stay on this slide long. You have profitability, growth, uniqueness, the age of the leadership, experience of leadership, mix of products. What services are you guys offering? Are you well balanced? Location. Typically, urban is valued more than rural. Typically. But I can also make a case, again, as a good broker, you can also make a case if you're the only player in town that offers that service, maybe there's value in that as well. So, and then obviously price is somewhat dictated by those individual characteristics of the buyer and whether would they be able to just easily fold you in? Is there strategic overlap? Is there some costs because of the way they're structured? So again, And these are factors that affect the price. So I do want to hit on this slide. This is an important slide for everyone, and this is probably one worth keeping if you want to either be a buyer or a seller. These are what make a successful deal. So understanding the desires. So if you come in and you're a prospective, Anita, if you're a prospective buyer, realize that making an offer to ranks this as important as anything else. What if the staff, the team, is family and you didn't realize it? What if it's in-laws? You'd be surprised how really understanding the seller's desires and what's important to them makes a productive conversation. And this is tough as a seller. Some things about your organization that makes you not attractive. So knowing what the buyer is looking for. And when it gets to the point where you have specific buyers making offers, knowing what matters to which one. So again, understanding desires. And then the financial terms, that's kind of obvious if the financial terms work for everyone. It's very often, you talk about capital, that we could do a whole presentation on where and how do you get what capital. Do you go to the bank? Do you get personal loans? There's all sorts of stuff there, but the financial terms obviously have to work for everyone. And then I hit on this a couple slides earlier. Have a defined roles, compensation for owners and leadership. That doesn't matter for-profit, not-for-profit, or even transitioning, right? If you're transitioning leadership, the more you define the roles, who gets compensated, when, how, for what, and what do they do, post-deal, the more that's defined, the better. Obviously, have a solid communication to staff and your consumers or clients, right? Having that spelled out is going to make that integration, make that a little more seamless. And then finally, an integration plan. And we'll do a slide on just the integration plan. So finally, have a solid integration plan. That's where the deal's already done. So at that point, it doesn't matter from the standpoint of getting the deal done. But that is where the rubber hits the road on success. That's where you have happy people or unhappy people, whether it's the buyers, the sellers, or the staff, or the consumers and clients. It doesn't matter. The integration plan is where the rubber hits the road. So what are the components of an integration plan? And I've built a handful of these. They all kind of revolve around a few things, and this is in no particular order. It's the client, the consumer. It's the communication there. It's staffing, and it's the IT and systems and processes timeline, and then a brand timeline. So the client and the client and the staffing are really about communication and training. That's pretty simple. The culture, someone mentioned culture earlier. That's what the client and staffing is about. The IT, but that timeline. And then we'll do the EVV system in July. So having that kind of spelled out, and then have a go-to expert. So have a system expert for every process at varying levels of the organization. I actually love having the grassroots people be the go-to. Have the people in there doing it, so that you might have a manager going to them to learn about this billing system. So again, having timelines for all these spelled out is really important. The brand's a big deal, especially if you're the seller, and having a plan for if you're the buyer. for what you do with the name of the organization, for their website? Do you have it immediately just point to yours? Do you phase the name out? So really try to have a good plan for what you want to do with the brand. So that is an integration. Again, this is just a snapshot of what you need to think about. So we have a statement from James. Great point. You can't underestimate the costs. That's a phenomenal point. That's especially a lot of times the people doing the deals are to defend James here. People doing the deals are kind of out of sight, out of mind on that nitty gritty of the IT and the processes. You don't want to be, especially as the buyer, you don't want to be. So it can get really expensive if you've not really mapped out a good game plan for integrating the processes in IT. Good point, James. So let's see, I've got about 15, a little under 15 minutes. Let's see, we'll talk about perpetuation real quick, and then kind of perfect timing. So we'll talk about perpetuation. You're not gonna sell. You want to transition ownership or leadership internally, which many people try of that it can't be done willy-nilly. If you want to internally perpetuate, and you're going to hear my story, and in essence, of organizations fail and do not make it to a fourth iteration or generation. And not necessarily fail, maybe they've sold, but there are only 8% of organizations that get to that fourth generation. So, and I just wanted to throw a couple slides in here on perpetuation. This is really a good guideline for what you need to think about if you're thinking about internally perpetuating. This first top tab here, not as important for not-for-profits, but if you're for-profit, the first thing you have to know, the internal value of an organization is always less than the external value. So that's something, to Anita's point earlier, if you're trying to hobnob with potential sellers, maybe you drip on that. Maybe they're not aware of the fact that, if they want to sell it internally to the team or management, or give it to, help perpetuate it and give it to a family member, internal values are always lower than what an organization would get on the quote unquote open market. To that, do you want to perpetuate? Advisors to perpetuate, the better. And then, kind of simultaneously to finding advisors, find that next generation of owners and leaders. Do they know that you want them to be an owner or a leader? And create a 3. I really don't recommend any less than 3, but and probably no more than 7, because it's really hard to plan that far out. But a 3 to 7 year game plan. Okay, and you have to have a game plan for 2 things, guys. 2 paths. You have to have a game plan for the actual ownership, right? So you actually have the legal and financial ramifications of transitioning shares, especially if it's for profit. And then you actually should have a similar game plan for transitioning roles and responsibilities. So my dad can own 80% of the business, but I could still be the one that is making all the decisions. Not everybody wants to do that, right? So again, ownership and decision making and roles, two different things. And then groom them through a course of years. Let them try different roles. I started at the very bottom of my family's agency. Let them try and let them fail. The key here is you got to give them enough rope to make decisions to not completely fail, but have projects that don't work out. Make an investment that doesn't work. Try a new service. Try, do something that you guys aren't doing today. So let them try and fail, and then have a good grasp on that leash. So I just real quickly wanted to give you guys some thoughts on perpetuation. Again, 92%, good snapshot. The key to perpetuation is planning. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because you guys have been really more interactive than I anticipated, and I appreciate that. And I know I'm coming up on time, and I want to provide time for some more questions. Then they bought some more Main Street. They bought someone bigger than them. Through the course of years, and as happen kind of simultaneously to that smart money, that private equity that I told you guys about. That private equity I told you guys about were coming in and started realizing, hey, insurance agencies are a good return. The stock market, 07, even through today, wasn't performing. So they were trying to find a return on their private capital. So they got into insurance. So you'll notice this graph in the upper right, top 10 buyers in 2019, 2 of them didn't even exist 3 years ago. And then another couple of these buyers of insurance agencies didn't exist before 2015. So that is literally just private equity coming in simultaneously to my family buying, friendly, to Anita's point about, who to buy. They were buying friendly competitors, people that they went on, rewards trips with and industry events. They were buying friendly competitors at a good 2 times the revenue price. Okay, so, but the number of deals went up, it was happening more and more. Oh, okay. It looks like we're missing something. Awesome. So basically what happened? The sharks were swimming around, right? And what happened is these sharks started dipping down into what they were doing. They were bidding against other people, and now some of those big PE buyers, some of those big buyers, were really interested in my dad and uncle's organization, and they were actually dipping into smaller agencies, smaller than they were. And so it just created that feeding frenzy. Well, what did that do to agency values? They were worth way more than we thought. So I'm wrapping up quick here. We thought 1 + 1 was equals 2. We thought we were going to perpetuate internally off of that 2. What we learned was 1 + 1 might equal 2, but 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 didn't equal 5. It equaled 20. And we were actually valued at 3 to 4 times what we thought we would have been. So that's a lesson straight from me, basically, in that we failed. And so part of our perpetuation plan was I carved out and created INSocial, and here I am speaking to you guys today. So it just blew up. Our game plan disappeared. Now I'm trying to be more of a buyer. I'm trying to buy other agencies. But that's a real short, I know I went quick there, but I wanted to tell you guys what it's done to my industry and why I'm passionate about being a resource to providers as this starts to happen in your industry. feel free to reach out to me. If you guys, the takeaway is basically be informed, stay aware that it's starting to go on, and plan, especially if you don't want to be a seller. Whether it's new leadership for a not-for-profit or perpetuating internally for a for-profit private company, private provider, plan. So I want to be a resource to you guys. If you have any questions, I will quit the screen share. We've got a few minutes. I'm here, and you guys will have my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And I really appreciate all your interaction and the time today. Any questions? Anita, if you have, if you want to chat offline, we can definitely do that. I have some tips and tricks. James, great question. Really, the acquisition that we just bid on and did not get, what I learned is that I tend to be a little too transparent up front. I'm okay with that, but what I shared is some game planning that I ultimately think that they weren't comfortable with, because anytime you're pitching to someone who has been a decision maker or an owner, it's going to be really hard. They don't want to rock the boat, and they don't even realize how much they don't want to rock the boat. So that's the biggest thing I learned was I got to be more careful about what I share about the game plan. So to me, it's a trade-off between, do I want to have a good organization and everybody involved happy, or do I really want to get a deal done? Because I could get a deal done by being a little bit more cutthroat, a little bit more aggressive pricing, and basically, not give them a say after the fact. So that's definitely what I learned. Yeah, John, great question. So I think it really depends. What I would say is I think 3 times is probably feasible long term, just because of where rates are, and I don't see. I'm an econ major and kind of an econ nerd, but not an expert. I just don't see interest rates climbing. Capital's really cheap. I can get debt really cheap, and so I think it's hard. Capital's cheap, and you're not getting a good return anywhere. So I think that it's feasible. And my industry specifically, and to some extent you guys is as well. You potentially have to stink to blow it up. So in other words, like, people pay their insurance bills. It's reoccurring revenue. Same thing. We're always going to want to support people with disabilities. So I do think in my industry, it's sustainable for it to be a little bit higher. I think 2 times it was an old school when, you couldn't easily buy an insurance agency down the road. It was just, the technological advancements to bring people in has definitely changed. And I think specifically, John, what independent agents like myself do, we focus on organizations. So if you were a shrinking book of home and auto clients, probably not. So same thing, something for you guys to be aware of. What services are you offering, and what's the long-term value, billing, all those things. Where's the direction of the services you're offering? That's important. How big of an impact on people who weren't previously sellers do you think the economy has? Yeah, so I've been a part of this through two crazy things going on. You had the financial crisis, and then you have COVID. I think that's I'm bidding on someone who all they own is restaurants, or I'm sorry, all they insure is restaurants. My passion, my niche is in DD providers, so I won't spend much time on it, but I think that scared that individual. I think the long-term capital gains tax potentially changing has definitely forced some sales that might have happened next year into this year. So it definitely plays a part, but you're still the average individual just doesn't want to change. So it definitely the economy plays a part in terms of maybe bumping up a timeline or motivating someone differently to get a deal done. But yeah, that's a great question, James. Let's see. I will type my contact information right now. Christine has it as well. And I'm all over the opera stuff. And so there's my contact information. And it's on my slides if we get copies of my slides out. And I'm really easy to find. And all the opera folks have my contact info. It sounds like this was beneficial. Sounds like I'm really happy I had interaction. It sounds like it was beneficial for people. Kim, I apologize. Absolutely. Kim, shoot me an email, Kim. Anybody else? I would have made it a little more entertaining if we were in person. So now you just forgive me, you had to stare at this gangly beard. Okay. Well, with that said, I'll assume no more questions, and I will probably stop sharing my screen. And we're going to let Christine say a few words.